Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you again for joining us on day 3 of our Information Security Summer Festival webinar series sponsored by iSecure. Again, coming to you live from Western New York, and I know I complained a little bit yesterday about the weather, but we actually have some sun and some warmth out there, so we are in a good mood over here at iSecure and are looking forward to today's presentations that we have going. Our 11 o'clock presentation is going to be featuring Paul Griswold. Paul comes to us from IBM, and today's discussion is going to be centered around defending against today's advanced network threats. I've had the pleasure of meeting with Paul at several different functions, and I think you guys are in for a real treat today with him. Very knowledgeable. As I mentioned, Paul comes to us from IBM, and I know sometimes people hear IBM and they're like, oh, well, it's just this big blue monster that's coming out from the closet and trying to, capitalize on something that's just there. But with the expertise that they have in the security realm, iSecure has been very, very pleased to see how they address the security information vector that's out there right now, and Paul is leading the charge of that. And I think one of the great things about Paul is that he has great industry knowledge. It's not centered around IBM or product or things like that, but really knows the information security space very well. So I think that everybody's going to be able to get something good out of that, and we're really looking forward to this presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the reins to Paul. Paul, thank you so much for kicking this off for us, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Paul, are you there? Hold on one second. Paul?
Hey, Paul, can you hear me now?
Yes, gotcha. Sorry
All right,
about that. I mean, that's my fault. That's a user error on my part, but go ahead. Thank you.
All right, great. So thanks very much for that great introduction, Paul. Really appreciate it. So I'm the other Paul on the call, Paul Griswold. I'm in charge of strategy and product management for IBM's infrastructure security division. And in particular, infrastructure security is really around protecting against the threats that you're going to see, most of which come through your network. So today I'm going to spend several minutes going through the state of this threat landscape, what we're seeing at IBM and throughout the industry, and then give you 3 specific areas that you need to focus on in order to help safeguard against these types of threats. So back when I started in information security in the late 90s, really our biggest issue at the time was worrying about website defacements. So you'd have kids who would figure out that the computers online weren't very secure. A lot of the web was very new, and people were just kind of throwing up basic websites at the time. And there'd be all sorts of security holes on these web servers. People would use those to break in and change the website to say something funny or something politically motivated or something like that. But there was really no damage done, so to speak. The administrators of the website would figure out the problem, they'd patch the security holes, and they'd change the website back, and really there was no damage done. However, if we look at what's going on these days, the motivation of the attackers is much more real. Where in the old days we had to worry about defacements, these days we have to worry about people stealing either your money or your things. And you see that with monetary gain types attacks that we see through things like Zeus, which are specifically focused by organized crime to get in and steal banking credentials and use that to steal money out of your banking account. We also have attacks like Aurora, where people will break into systems and rather than just getting in and out very quickly, they'll actually be within a network for several days, sometimes even months and even years, in order to move around inside of a corporation, find more and more important documents, and then steal those. If you look at Aurora in particular, this was people breaking into companies like eBay, trying to get to their source code so they could put backdoors directly in the eBay source code. So pretty serious threats, but at the same time, the payoff could be huge for the people if they're successful. Just as if you hack into eBay and you're able to steal everyone's PayPal information, you have a lot of different accounts that you can use to steal money from. And then in most extreme circumstances, we see things like Stuxnet, which are actually nation states using cyber attacks against each other, just like they'd use bombs and missiles in the past. So with Stuxnet in particular, that was geared to a particular country's nuclear program to try to disable it by hacking into the computers that controlled it and breaking things that are in the nuclear refineries. So in the good old days, we had to worry about just website defacements. These days, the attackers are much more motivated, much more organized, and the stakes are much, much more high. At the same time, it's not like it's gotten any easier for us security professionals. The number of vulnerabilities continue to increase each year, and you can see that graph over here on the left-hand side of the slide. These are number of vulnerabilities per year. So just last year, we had over 8,000 vulnerabilities disclosed just in 1 year. You still got to worry about the vulnerabilities that were disclosed in the prior years as well. You've got to make sure you have protection against those. But it's a constantly challenging battle to try to keep up with all the different attacks that are coming out and making sure that you can get your patches in place. And even when patches exist, because in some cases patches don't exist, but even patches do exist, you always have the time it takes to roll those things out and get them onto your systems. I know of very few organizations who are able to, the very same day Microsoft puts out a patch, have it rolled out to, say, thousands of servers in less than a day. It usually takes a couple of weeks to get all the servers patched. So you have that issue. You also have the issue of the attacker motivation that I mentioned before. And you see that with the zero-day attacks and the constant mutating threats, as well as the multifaceted and APT threats. With the attacks as they come out, it's very rare that an attacker is just going to take a security advisory that comes out from a vendor and look at the proof of concept in there and then use that to launch their attack. The reason they don't do this is because they know everyone in the world is going to be able to detect the proof of concept vulnerability. That's going to be in, everything from your free intrusion prevention system all the way up to the one you spend $500,000 on. So what attackers are typically going to do is they're going to take that proof of concept and they're going to change it slightly so it looks different on the wire but is just as effective as getting into the systems they're trying to attack. So by creating this mutation, they're able to bypass pretty much anything that's just looking for specific patterns for the attack, and they'll be able to get right in. But at the same time, they've not spent a lot of time creating something brand new. They're using an existing thing, changing it so it doesn't get detected, but the effectiveness to get into the intended target is the exact same. And I also mentioned the multifaceted threats and APTs. We've gone from having to worry about just people trying to break in through your web servers and your infrastructure to people actually attacking users within your organization, not necessarily through a shellcode or some sort of maliciousness like that, but a lot of times was just a simple spear phishing email to use that to get within an organization. Once you get into the organization, you move laterally, try to get deeper and deeper, trying to get more and more valuable data that you can use to somehow make money off of. And you see at the bottom, the average cost of a breach, according to Ponemon, is about $5.9 million. And you have all these compliance pressures on top of that. So if you look at a very well-known retail breach that happened over the Christmas season, they've spent about $60 million so far, according to publicly available information. $60 million so far just on the response to the attack. So that includes things like cleanup, it includes bringing in emergency response services to fully understand the extent of the attack, and it also includes mundane things like stamps. About 20 million different people were affected by that particular attack, and in a lot of states, the way you have to notify these people is still by the mail. So even if you're getting the best bulk rates that the post office offers because you've got to mail out 20 million of these things, you're still spending about $5 million just on stamps. That's a very interesting conversation to have with your board that you need an extra $5 million that wasn't budgeted because you've got to send out all of these letters to people because you had a security breach. If you look at slide 5 here, we're definitely in an era of continuous breaches. And you'll see data here from the IBM X-Force Security Intelligence Report. This is a report that used to be released on a yearly basis, but now we're doing one every quarter that focuses on different things. And you can see the trends of the attacks just dating back from 2011 up to 2013. One thing that I'll point out here is not that we're getting more dots every year. That's certainly of interest, but also the fact that the gray dots are increasing as well. The gray dots mean that the attack that was used to get into an organization was either undisclosed, meaning the organization admitted that they have an attack, but they didn't really tell how it happened. But a lot of times it's just frankly unknown. The organization doesn't know how people got in. They just know that their data was stolen and that they were breached. So, again, the real value to the attacker is going to be the data that they're able to obtain. And you see a 40% increase in reported data breaches and incidents over the past couple of years. So certainly something that is very much of concern, for pretty much all verticals. You certainly have the typical ones like finance and healthcare, but as you see with retail and things like that, I mean, these are problems for pretty much anyone who transacts money or has some sort of confidential information about their customers or client base. If you look at how products have been designed traditionally, they're typically designed to prevent very specific broad attacks that are not necessarily reflective of what we're seeing today. So if you continue to take a tactical approach, which is what a lot of people have been doing for the past several years, you rely on specific point products. You have products that do one thing, then you add on additional products to do other things. So you don't have good data integration there, and a lot of times you have multiple products that could oftentimes be combined down into one. I'll give you an example with IBM, and this is a pretty extreme example, but we had a particular customer who told us, their CIO told us, that they have 85 different products in their security suite from 45 different vendors. And every product they've added over the past 5 years has been additive. So they started out with maybe 3 vendors and 5 products, and then they've had to add on and add on and add on as the attacks have increased, and they're not retiring any of the products they have in their organization because they all serve a specific function. So you think about that, 85 products is just a nightmare to manage from just a usability standpoint. Having to have people who are familiar with even 5 or 6 of these things can be challenging, let alone 85. But when you think about the renewals every year and paying the maintenance on these products, you've got 45 different vendor relationships you're managing and 45 different checks that you're writing for all these maintenance that you're doing every year. So obviously that's an extreme example I believe that was a pretty big government institution, but it filters down even to the smallest companies. You have 50-person companies who may have 7 or 8 different security products that they're using to protect against various types of threats. You also have issues with people relying on third parties for their research. So a lot of the solutions you have out there don't have their own independent research organizations within the company. They're buying their research on the third-party market, or they're just taking publicly available information and using that as their research. To have really effective protection, you've got to have people who are actually doing in-house research and getting ahead of the threats that are going to be coming in a couple of years, rather than just reacting to what we're seeing today. So let's take a look at one of the top threats that you're facing. So if you look at this email here on slide 7, looks like it's a very urgent email, has urgent in the subject line. It appears to be from a very high-ranking executive within this company, and it's to 3 different people who happen to work in the accounting department or the finance department of this particular company. So you look here, the top-ranking executive. If you read the message itself, it's very troubling. If you're working in finance and you get an email from, likely your boss's boss or your boss's boss's boss saying we have a huge problem with our financial reports from last year according to our auditors, that's something that's going to get your attention, especially if it's sent first thing in the morning at 7 a.m. Another telltale sign of this type of threat is there's an urgent call to action saying, hey, I need you to get on this right away. I'm going to be sending up a call. We all got to come prepared to this. So if you look at this a little bit more closely, you'll notice the blind link. So rather than attaching some sort of document or something like that, a lot of times these things will have a link that says, please click here for the details, but you can't really tell where that here comes from or where that here goes to. And even if you're somewhat intelligent in terms of this type of threat and you actually mouse over the here, a lot of times that'll take you to a bit.ly URL or some sort of other type of URL that masks where it's actually going to in the end. Another very telltale sign here is if you look very closely here, it says James Fowler CFO in the name that's going to show up in your inbox. But if you look at the actual email addresses associated with the name, it's actually a Yahoo email account. So this looks like it's coming from the CFO to a couple of people here within the organization. But in reality, this is a spear phisher who's using a very well-crafted email, but at the same time, just using a Yahoo account. It's not actually an AcmeCo account in this case. The reason these types of attacks are so successful is because they're at the users themselves. The recipients that this attacker chose are known to work in finance, and the way he figured this out is he went to LinkedIn, searched AcmeCo, filtered by people who work in finance, got 3 people's names, figured out the email format of AcmeCo's email addresses, and sent those. So you know that people are there within the company, and chances are they're going to be receiving the email. At the same time, this is not a spam email. There's nothing in this email that exhibits signs of spam. There's no images, there's no multiple links. There is one blind link, but a lot of times that's not enough to trip a spam filter. So as a result, it's going to get right by any solution you have in place to filter out spam. You also have the benefit of having this urgent time frame. So, again, lower level employees in finance get an email from a pretty high-ranking person, chances are one of the three are going to click on the link in the email pretty quickly. So this type of attack took about an hour's worth of research, and you've got a 33% chance of it being effective if just one person clicks on the link. So you still have to worry about all the stuff we've worried about before in terms of making sure your servers are patched and secure and making sure your web applications that have vulnerabilities and all that other stuff, is people are still going to try to get in that way too. But then you have this very serious threat that is very easy for the attacker to do, has a very high chance of succeeding, and really comes down to protecting user behavior rather than just typical network traffic that you protect in the past. So in order to guard against this type of threat, you really need three primary types of defense. One, you've got to have a knowledge of in-the-wild type of attack. So you've got to know all about where malware is coming from, what techniques are being used, what servers are being used to send this malware out, all sorts of reputation information, and the only way you get that is through good security intelligence and security research. On top of that, you also need a level of protection on your network. So you can have all this great intelligence, but then you've got to turn around and make it actionable. So with network-type solutions, you're going to be able to take action on this intelligence and be able to block a lot of the characteristics of the threat that we just saw. Unfortunately, though, network is not enough. As somebody who lives and breathes network products on a daily basis, I'd love to be able to say, hey, buy a network product and all your problems are solved. But there are often times where users are simply not going to be on the network in order for you to be able to catch these types of threats. Sometimes it'll be an issue with bring your own device, where people have laptops or tablets that are not registered in the corporate database, and as a result aren't going to have your typical controls and patch management. Other times it's going to be corporate devices that are simply connected to Starbucks or a hotel room when they get attacked. They're going to come back, plug those things back into the network. They're going to be just as infected as they were off the network. So if you don't have an endpoint-based level of protection, you're going to be able to miss some of these types of threats. So let's get into each one of these three. Let's start with the in-the-wild intelligence. The intelligence has to be expansive, and here you can see some statistics around IBM's threat intelligence capabilities, but whatever intelligence source you're using, it's got to have stats like this. It's got to have the ability to look at different types of web pages and images to figure out their reputation. It's got to be able to manage and analyze spam and phishing attacks. It's got to know about vulnerabilities, all the other types of good stuff. One unique thing about IBM's coverage is that we also get the benefit of managed services as well. So our managed services are managing 3,700 different clients throughout the world. They're seeing 15 billion different security events a day. All of that data gets fed into our X-Force, which turns around and creates the intelligence for our products to use. So even for our clients who are not managed services clients, they're still getting the benefit of the visibility we get through managed services, because that goes into X-Force and down into the products. You also have to have this intelligence in all of the different products you're using. So if you have intelligence in just one of the products, that could be good as long as that product is in line to see the attack. But if you have other products that are not sharing the same intelligence, you're going to have a gap there. So whatever intelligence you're using has to be present in all the different places, not only on the network and on the endpoint, but also in your security intelligence platform. So if you're using a solution like QRadar, if you're using ArcSight or whatever it may be that you're using for security intelligence, you've got to be able to take advantage of that intelligence as well in the analytics platform. Going back to that well-known retail example, the issue that they had, and again, this is all available on the internet, so I'm not disclosing anything proprietary here, but the issue they had was not necessarily a detection issue. They had two different products alert them of the attacks. What they had issues was putting that information together with other different products and other different data sources to say, hey, yeah, this is something that we really need to pay attention to versus that this is a false positive. So that just reinforces the fact the intelligence has to be everywhere, and you've got to be able to take advantage of it from all the different vantage points. And then finally, the intelligence needs to have a global scope. A lot of times the people who are breaking into the U.S.-based corporations aren't based in the U.S. So when you have people who are based in other countries, they may be trying out different attack techniques or other types of methods that they're going to plan on using later to break into the U.S. But a lot of times it's going to show up in their own home country first. So having visibility into those types of trends that may be just regional right now is certainly very important, because what's regional today will soon become international in a matter of days or weeks. So having that early warning and having that early intelligence to things that are not just U.S.-centric is just absolutely vital to be able to provide any types of protection. So if we look at the threat that we saw before, what in the wild intelligence means to this threat is really around reputation data and other types of techniques that you're going to be able to feed down. So with reputation data, you're going to get information on phishing and malware sites, botnet command and control, anonymous proxies, or quite simply sites that have not been categorized. So there are several different components of this that could help protect against this type of email. I want to draw particular attention to the uncategorized sites. We've had clients who have gotten a great level of additional protection just by blocking any site that hasn't been seen by the data that we have on our URL reputation. So the URL reputation is obviously going to contain all of the well-known sites like Salesforce.com and Amazon and eBay and all those other sites. It's going to have good data on that. And it's also going to have a data on a bunch of sites that we know are going to be bad. But if someone set up a site this morning and they just sent out this spear phishing email, something we haven't categorized yet, it's going to show up as something that we don't know about. So having a rule that blocks those uncategorized sites can oftentimes help prevent these types of attacks, even if the link is only minutes old. By saying it's uncategorized, we're able to prevent people from clicking on that and going into it. So let's move on to the network-based protection component. A lot of people think of this as intrusion prevention, and intrusion prevention is certainly a big part of this. But the fact of the matter is intrusion prevention is about a 12-year-old technology. And we can go back another 5 years, back to '97, when we saw intrusion detection first come onto the market. So intrusion prevention is not something that you can discard. It's certainly something that's very valuable today and something that continues to provide a great level of protection. But it's not all you need. And you can see, this is the IBM timeline, but this is also more or less an industry timeline as well, where you see different capabilities being added to the product to guard against whatever the latest attacks are. So intrusion prevention is certainly the core, but you also need to worry about behavioral defense. This type of thing will often prevent zero-day attacks from being successful. Going on up through the spectrum, you see web app protection, URL and app control, all very important. SSL inspection is also critical as well, and I'll get into some details on this here in a couple of minutes. But what the attackers have figured out is that if they launch their malware from a HTTPS website rather than an HTTP site, the first generation intrusion prevention that many companies still have in place is going to be completely blind to that SSL traffic. So you need to be able to do some sort of way of looking inside of that traffic to truly provide protection against those malicious links, especially when you consider sites like Twitter and Facebook. They use SSL by default, and a lot of times they also use URL shorteners by default. So you've got to be able to look inside of that traffic to figure out where it's really going, and if it's a malicious site or a harmful site, be able to block that. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is by getting inspection inside of SSL. On top of that, you also have malware defense. The basic premise is that with all of these different protections in place, you're going to disrupt a large amount of the attacks that are going to be going against you, but chances are there's still going to be a couple that get through. So you need to have the ability to not only be able to detect malware that might be already within your network or somehow got in your network despite all your defenses, but be able to share data with that and be able to truly manage the threats that malware poses within your environment. And go as far in some cases to do forensics and other things so you have a true understanding of where the malware has been and what information may have already been stolen. So again, network protection has to guard against the full threat spectrum. It can't just be specific around vulnerabilities that have been disclosed by vendors or things like that. You can see all the different types of things that you need to protect against on this slide. And if you look at the traffic base and the service system and service layers, those are really almost kind of first generation IPS type solutions. Where we get into some of the next generation, second generation, third generation, whatever you want to call it, that's where it goes further and further up the stack. So being able to protect against attacks that go against web applications, attacks that go specifically against users, and going as far to control risky applications and things like that. That's really where the next generation comes in, and that's where you get the full spectrum of threat protection rather than things that are more isolated just to the system and service type threats. Still got to worry about those, but those are not, you can't take your eye off all the other threats that are present these days. On top of that, you also have to be able to properly analyze and classify the traffic. So it's not a question of just being able to throw a bunch of patterns against the traffic that's going on the wire and, you know, hitting things here and there. You've got to be able to fully understand the traffic that's going on. So, you know, for instance, if you have a application that looks like a web application, but it's talking on port 82 rather than port 80, probably pretty suspicious. Could also be that, you know, a particular administrator within the organization couldn't run port 80 for whatever reason. He had to put his legitimate application on port 82. So being able to truly understand that, you know, hey, we've got something here on port 82, and being able to understand that truly is web traffic is very important, because then you're going to be able to apply the right types of protection on top of that. At the same time, if port 82 is IRC traffic, or you see IRC traffic going over port 80, you know, that's also suspicious. So you have to really be able to understand the traffic that's going on, regardless of the port or regardless of the protocol that's being used. You got to really be able to pull that stuff apart. On top of that, you've got to have visibility into SSL as well to have the highest levels of protection. And there are two components of this. One is the inbound traffic, so the traffic is going to your web servers. Very often attackers will use web servers to break into an organization. If you look at the latest data from the X-Force, still about a third of the attacks that are going against companies start out as SQL injection or cross-site scripting. So web traffic's very prone to attacks, but a lot of times customers will use HTTPS because they want to safeguard a user's data. So that's great for the user's data, but not so great for your first generation IPS because it's not going to be able to look inside that traffic. So having a solution that's truly able to look inside the SSL, be able to inspect it for traffic that's coming in is very important. At the same time, you also have to be able to look into traffic that's going out as well. Because when you think about those user-based threats, if an attacker is constructing a spear phishing email, he's pretty smart. He knows if he puts a HTTPS as the link rather than just HTTP, a lot of times that's going to go right by most of the traditional defenses. So having visibility not only to the traffic that's coming into you encrypted, but also the traffic that's going out encrypted is truly critical. From there, you also want to set different types of policies to control potentially risky behavior. So having the ability to identify the different applications, like I mentioned before, is important, but you also need the ability to identify different employees as well. So if you have an application like, I'll say, you know, some sort of file sharing type application, not a bad application in itself, but at the same time, your corporate policy may prohibit your corporate data from living up on a cloud service. So you may want to create a rule that doesn't allow employees to post stuff to Dropbox or Box or SkyDrive or Google Drive or all these other different places. Again, the application itself isn't malicious, but if your corporate policy forbids using that type of thing, you're just reducing your attack area and your surface area of risk. So someone breaks into Dropbox and steals your data, you know, you don't have that problem, so you're preventing Dropbox from being used. So a couple of stats here on the bottom, 400 protocols and file formats analyzed. This is an IBM number. And again, you know, having that visibility into the different protocols and the different file formats is certainly very, very critical to being able to see all the different places where these attacks can come through. 22 billion URLs classified in 70 different categories. And we also have that uncategorized option as well for users who are very paranoid. They want to make sure that if we don't know about a URL, no one's clicking on it. We have that capability as well. We also have the ability to control individual actions on specific web applications. So you look at Facebook, for instance. Very few companies completely ban Facebook from the corporate network because they know people are going to be looking at it on their phone or their iPad or whatnot. So it's a losing battle, and they typically aren't going to ban users from going to Facebook from the corporate network. However, what they might do is prevent users from attaching files or starting video chats or launching games or other things within Facebook that in and of themselves may be risky behaviors. So you let users go, they can read Facebook, post on their wall, stuff like that, but you actually have the ability to create that very granular policy that says, while they can do this typical Facebook activity, I'm not going to allow them to launch an application, I'm not going to allow them to launch a video chat, I'm not going to allow them to upload an attachment. So having that granular ability is certainly something that's very useful, and it prevents the draconian allow Facebook, don't allow Facebook, because no one's going to prevent Facebook, but does allow you that additional level of control to prevent risky behaviors. And then finally, when it comes to the network protection, you have to go beyond just simple pattern matching. So some of the solutions that are out there are particularly solutions that may be based on freely available pattern matching lists, signature lists. They're just looking for specific exploits. The problem with this approach is that you're always going to be behind because the exploit itself has to be known before you can create a pattern to match the exploit. So if you look at the things here on the right, these are the type of characteristics that a truly advanced system is going to have. Vulnerability decodes or vulnerability signatures are certainly good as well because once a vulnerability is known, if you have protection for the vulnerability itself rather than specific attacks against the vulnerability, as people mutate things and as people change the attack around a little bit so it looks different on the wire, as long as it's going against the same vulnerability, you're going to have protection against that. So it works very well when the vulnerability is known and puts you a little bit ahead, but at the same time you have the issue of having to know about the vulnerability in the first place. So that's where all these other characteristics come in on the slide to protect against attacks that haven't even been named yet, haven't been disclosed. There's no advisories on them yet. They're true 0 days. And the key component around this type of protection is something called heuristics. And what heuristics does is it's able to identify patterns that are known to be used by attackers, even if they're not against specific vulnerabilities that you may have on your systems. So a great example of this is the fourth one down, the shellcode heuristics. It's very rare that having x86 instructions or x86 shellcode within web traffic or within attachments or things like that, that's very rarely a good thing. But at the same time, it's not enough just to look for one or two different pieces of shellcode. You've got to be able to piece things together and truly get a good picture of what the attack's trying to do to avoid false positives. And you've got to be able to do this in all different vectors. So you got to worry about it in web traffic. You got to worry about it in email traffic. You got to worry about it in things like Adobe documents and Word documents and Flash files and Java and all these different components. Even though the vectors themselves may be different, the shellcode itself is often pretty similar. So if you're able to detect the shellcode and you're able to layer that on top of something that's able to pull apart 400 different protocols and file formats, you're going to get very good 0-day protection for attacks that haven't been named yet and aren't necessarily going against the known vulnerability. Another component around this is just simple protocol anomaly detection. You actually see this with the some of the recent attacks that have come out. And Heartbleed's a good example of this, where all that is an anomaly with the protocol itself. So having the ability to be able to look at these things is certainly something that will help. It's never 100%. No one has all the different possible protocols fully spec'd out. And even sometimes when they do have good knowledge on protocols, it'll be very well known for certain vendors to abuse the protocols or do them, do things within the protocols that go against the specification or the RFC. So a lot of times you'll have to create some sorts of exceptions sometimes to be able to manage that. But being able to detect anomalies in protocols is something that is very useful and oftentimes, similar to the heuristics, is able to disrupt attacks before they're well known and well publicized. So if we look back here at slide 20, if we look specifically around the spear phishing email that we looked at previously, having this intelligence on your network is going to be able to block the malicious link. It's going to be able to block, say, a malicious attachment. So if on this email, rather than having a link, they actually had an attachment in there that was a malicious PDF file, having the ability to do that shellcode heuristics and disrupt that at the network layer is certainly very important. And at the same time, if you have systems within your environment that are already infected, having the ability to disrupt that command and control with the botnets back to their home base oftentimes just effectively renders the infection useless. So if it can't talk out, it can't exfiltrate data, and it can't get commands, it'll still be in your environment. You still need to clean it up, but at the same time, you've reduced the threat because you've severed that communication link. So all of these are different things that can be done from network-based solutions. So as I mentioned, network certainly gets you a long way to where you need to be, but you still have the endpoint consideration as well. And I think it's significant. If you look at Symantec about a month ago, they had a blog entry where they basically admitted that signature-based antivirus isn't cutting it anymore. It'll protect the well-known stuff and the stuff that's old, but for the truly advanced types of malware, it's not effective. So Symantec's got a solution to that. Other vendors have a solution to that as well. But a lot of times, getting the visibility into the attacks and really getting to the absolute closest point of infection before the infection actually happens is done at the endpoint. So when you have endpoint-based protection, it's going to catch things that may not be detectable on the network, and at the same time, it's going to protect against attacks that happen when the user is not on the corporate network and afforded that protection by the network-based solution. So if you look at 3 different layers of security, exploit prevention is obviously a big one. So being able to protect against the exploitations happening, also protect against drive-by downloads. We certainly have capabilities to protect against drive-by downloads at the network layer as well, but being able to do it at the host gives you that extra visibility. And if you have the drive-by download constructed from 4 or 5 different traffic streams that probably look fine at the network layer, but once you get them on the endpoint or the host, starting to put them together and have the exploitation happen, that's the type of thing that you're not going to be able to detect anywhere other than the endpoint. If, for some reason you do get exploited or you have a previous infection on your network, the next step is really preventing against data being exfiltrated. So being able to block that malware communication and prevent the information theft, again, can be done in the network, also very effectively done at the endpoint. On top of that, the endpoint provides you with the ability to do things like preventing corporate credentials from being reused. Typically, you're not going to want somebody using their username and password on your corporate network, which is the exact same one that they use on Facebook or Amazon or other places. So being able to detect the password hashes, we don't know the actual passwords, but we know the hashes, and being able to compare those against different types of logins can help you enforce a corporate policy that prevents your credentials from being reused anywhere other than on the corporate network. With the exploit prevention, it's really all around the action in the state. So having the context of the application gives you a good idea of what known good behavior is or what unknown or potentially malicious behavior may be. So for instance, I'll give a pretty simplistic example. If you think about Adobe, if you're launching Adobe Flash inside of your browser, typically the only place that should be doing certain types of communications to pull down executables and things like that is the Adobe website that's going out there for updates. If suddenly you see the Adobe process going out and pulling down executables from some sites that you don't know, and then they're writing down to the file system and trying to be executed, that's typically never good behavior. But you're only going to get that visibility into process creation and things like that at the endpoint. At the network, you're going to see the traffic go by. You're going to see potentially be able to block things that are known to be malicious and may use heuristics that we'd be able to pick up that. But if for some reason that gets by the network protection or the network protection is not there because the user's in a hotel room, that's where you really need this endpoint stuff coming in to block it. And again, the way that malware typically will communicate is through compromising other application processes. So a lot of times when a piece of malware wants to talk out, it's not just going to launch its own process. It's going to go launch Internet Explorer and then basically pull the strings for Internet Explorer and tell it where to send URLs and things like that. So having the ability to detect these compromised application process goes a long way to that data exfiltration prevention. So again, looking back to the email itself, say your network defense wasn't active because the user was outside the corporate network. Even if someone clicks on the attachment, they get it down to their endpoint and starts running, having an endpoint-based solution is going to be basically your last layer of defense, and it's going to be able to disrupt these types of exploitations and be able to prevent the malware from running. So again, I tried to make the presentation pretty product agnostic, but if you're looking at specifically for IBM-type solutions, you can see where the different products lie. In the wild, intelligence is through our X-Force, and X-Force is a research and development organization that's been around since 1997 or so. It was actually part of ISS, which is how I came into IBM, Internet Security Systems, for those of you who may be familiar. X-Force was the premier cornerstone of ISS, and as it's come into IBM, a lot of the old ISS brands are no longer around, but X-Force is still around, and it continues to be our preeminent research and development organization for security threats. And you have the ability to use X-Force in all of our different products. If you look at the network protection component, this is going to be our XGS product. This is our next generation threat management, threat protection platform. You may be familiar with Prevenia or GX or some of those other acronyms that have been around since the ISS days. The XGS is a brand new product that guards against all of the different things I told you about in the network section. So it's been in market about 9 months. The adoption has been phenomenal. We've had very good luck, particularly upgrading older GX clients to this latest solution, and we've had very good luck in head-to-head competitions against competitors as well. So very pleased with the XGS performance. When you look at the endpoint, we actually have a couple of different solutions there. One is our endpoint manager. Some of you may know this as BigFix. BigFix was a technology that IBM acquired, I'd say about 4 or 5 years ago, specifically around endpoint management. So using endpoint manager powered by BigFix, you're going to get your patch management, you're going to get your configuration management, compliance, all that other type of stuff. And you also have the capability of managing antivirus components, and the endpoint manager also has its own AV in there as well. On top of BigFix or Endpoint Manager, you also get Trustier Apex. And Trustier Apex is specifically designed around combating the threats and the methods using the methods I showed you on just a few slides ago. So Apex is all around preventing malware infections, exploitations, and things like that, and it's not signature-based. It's looking for the behaviors that are typically present for malware, and it does that blocking like I had mentioned before. So all three of these different things provide various levels of protection. Obviously, if you have all three, you have great protection, but you certainly get very good protection with each individual component. So, for instance, if you're looking at your endpoint and say, you know, I've got another 9 months left on my Symantec or my McAfee, I'm not even going to look at anything right now, that's fine, but you still can get the benefits from a network protection type component if you have the need for that at this particular time. So that is it for the presentation. I think we're going to open it up to questions.
Hey, Paul, this is Paul Robinson. Thank you so much for sharing. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great, excellent. As I put in the chat window, everybody, if you have any questions for Paul, please feel free to be able to reach out to him for that. I have a couple of questions here already. One of the questions here, Paul, is that we talked about network security, but we didn't talk about the firewall. And with the discussions that we hear in our industry today about next generation firewall and the Ciscos and the Junipers of the world, what's your stance around the firewall piece of security, and how is IBM and you approaching that sort of question that comes up?
Sure, that's a great question. And to your point, Paul, firewall is often the first piece of security software or equipment that was ever installed within an organization. So firewalls continue to have a place. They continue to be, oftentimes critical, not only in security, but also that switching and routing the infrastructure of networks. Oftentimes you'll have firewalls in place that are really more routers and access control devices than they are true firewalls. So the XGS that I mentioned before is not a firewall. Our approach is that firewalls are going to continue to be there. They've almost become a commodity. You have firewall capabilities on dedicated firewalls, but you're also seeing them pop up on switches and routers and other type of capabilities where you can get firewall-like functionality on those devices as well. So with the XGS, we are complementary to firewalls. If you have a firewall in place, that's great. We'll add all of these additional features on top of it. And a lot of clients will go to the XGS because they want a next-gen firewall, so they want the capability of controlling what users do and getting application awareness and things like that. But at the same time, the firewall they have in place is working just fine. So they don't want to go through the expense and the risk of ripping out their firewall just to get these next-gen features. With the XGS, they get those next-gen features with a solution that doesn't require replacement of the firewall.
Great, thank you so much. Another question just fired in here. In your chart with the attack and the time frames that we're going through that, Paul, there are more undisclosed attack types than known types. How are you managing your solution around the undisclosed attack types?
So that is a great question, and that goes back to the heuristics capabilities I mentioned before. We're certainly going to do a very good job on all of the known attacks, and most solutions in the industry do a pretty decent job on the known attacks as well. But having the ability to pick up heuristically the things that look like attacks, even if they aren't stuff that's on our list of things that have been disclosed, That's typically how our users, our customers are using us to prevent those types of issues. But it's a very good observation. You have more gray dots on that chart than you do colored dots, and I think that's a trend that's going to continue on. So as a result, if you have a solution that's only looking for known stuff, it's going to be missing at least half of the true attacks that are going on.
Great, excellent, excellent. Another question that we have here is in regards to managed services, and I don't know if you can answer that, but you know, it seems here one of the concerns that folks have is that managed services are just directly looking to replace InfoSec folks that work directly at the company. Can you talk a little bit about how IBM works with the managed services piece and helps augment the staff instead of actually replacing it? I don't know if you could speak on that.
So yeah, I can't really speak on that. Managed services is outside of my group. I think, Paul, you're exactly right. I mean, we often do staff augmentation, and you know, for example, a lot of times we'll be the night people. So when you have people during the day, they're monitoring, you know, those will be the employees of the company, and then at night they'll switch over to us. So we have several different ways of that working. I will say from a product perspective, we certainly have things for our own managed services, but at the same time, we're not exclusive to our managed services. So we sell to a lot of MSSPs, and they manage the products, you know, themselves rather than having to go through our MSS.
Great, excellent, excellent. I think that is actually it for the questions that I have here. Paul, great presentation. Appreciate the value that you brought to Webinar Week, and kind of one of the things that we were discussing over here is that you're solving a problem with the solutions that you're talking about. So many times we, even here at iSecure, hear folks talk about their solutions and they don't address the problems first. And I think that's key to being able to not just throw a product or solution out there, but to make sure that we're solving a problem with that. So that's great. Thanks again so much for that. Folks, also, just as a reminder, if you are on Twitter, feel free to follow iSecure_LLC, and there will be some highlights from our presentation here from Paul that will highlight some of the things that he talked about, and yeah, just want to make sure that you're reminded of that. Other than that, thank you so much again, Paul, for the presentation, and we'll see everybody back here at 2 p.m. Take care.
Thank you.